Welcome to another episode of Why We Podcast, where attorneys and accountants, coaches, and consultants share how their show helps. Their show helps at least 3 or 4 different types of people. I'm sure it helps themselves, but maybe even more importantly, their show helps their clients, their types of audience. It helps their guests, most certainly. There are others that are going to be introduced to their show that comes out of the woodwork. So I'm always excited to learn from other podcast hosts. What makes us fun is that this is a podcast about podcasts, more than about podcasts.
Yay!
Very, very meta perspective. So I get to learn. I am the co-founder of Video Socials, and we're a video blogging community. So those same type of professionals who have podcasts also have video blogs very often. They come onto our platform and they record podcast promo videos, but they also record insights and knowledge nuggets, as it were. So for me, it's always inspirational to learn from other podcast hosts. Today, we have Terry Rhodes and Gail Kraft. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to them having a great conversation, which they already started off the air. So from that aspect, we're just really continuing on. I wasn't part of that conversation. I came a minute ago. So they're going to catch me up, and we're going to learn a thing or two. Terry, can you share a little bit, before we even get into your podcast and how that got started and why you called it that, tell us a little bit more about your business and how and why you do what you do.
Certainly. So I have an organization called Teen Job Help, and I founded it about 3 years ago when my son, who was then 13, was looking for a summer job. And so I was going online trying to help him. And I realized there's a lot of information out there on the internet, as there are about any subject, but it was all very disjointed. And so I took a lot of notes, I made some spreadsheets, gave him all of the information, and then I decided to share it with some of my other mom friends. And then I thought, well, other parents might be interested in this information. So I put together a website and just kind of threw all the information up there. And then I decided I would prefer to give the information directly to teens, empower them to use that information to search for their jobs, volunteering, internships, mentorships. So that's how it started.
Oh, that's really cool. What about you, Gail? Tell us a little bit more about what you do.
So I'm an empowerment coach and I'm a podcaster, right?
What does that mean as an empowerment coach? What do you mean by that?
So I work with clients who they've lost their mojo. They're people, most of them are successful people, and if you saw them externally, they have the house, they have the job or the company, they have the career, they
Right.
have it all, and they feel empty, right? And it really is about connecting with who they are and finding out what makes them happy, what makes them tick, and how to do that in a very organic way.
So now, Terry, is your platform like a membership type platform?
No, it's just an information platform. I call myself
Okay.
a knowledge broker, and I just put information up there about jobs and for teens and their parents to look at.
But it's nonetheless like a platform, right? They're coming there. You're not talking to them necessarily one-on-one.
No, I do that as well.
Oh, you do that as well? Okay,
Yes.
cool. Because I was going to contrast that. Okay, so you also do one-on-one and I'm assuming, right, from a placement standpoint to find the right opportunity fit?
More of just kind of guiding them. They tell me what their interests are and what their background is, and then I actually search for jobs in their area and give them a list, and then just kind of hand it over to them.
Good, because I was really just wanting to make a contrast, not to cut Gail off, because I'm assuming you are working one-on-one with your clients, Gail?
Yes, and yes, I do work with my clients one-on-one. I do work with teams sometimes, depending if I'm working with a client on leadership. I'm usually working with the leadership team as well, and I do presentations.
And so, if there's a team, you're being invited into like a business, into their leadership and management team, where there's maybe a feeling of what? Like, what are they feeling when they bring you in? I can see a little bit of, not to cut you off, but I'm going to paraphrase and you correct me. Like, as an individual, it's kind of they've arrived, but it doesn't feel fulfilling. Is that as an individual? Then how does that translate to a team?
Usually, it's communication and leadership skills in a team. Yeah.
And then, how and when did you start your podcast, and how does that dovetail?
Well, the podcast I started 2 years ago. Like right after COVID started.
Okay,
right?
Sure. Happy 2 years.
Oh my
Well, for the
goodness,
podcast at least.
it's been fantastic. And I started it actually. I have been told for a couple of years, you need to podcast, you need to podcast. I'm like, just because I'm told I'm going to, I need to, right? So I did some soul searching. What's the purpose of the podcast?
Sure.
What's the focus of the podcast? Why would I even be on there?
Right.
Because that determines who I'm going to invite on and the
Sure.
types of conversations we're going to have.
Sure. Right.
Right. And so so I decided that my podcast is about the difficult conversations. So, I have a few episodes out there on surviving rape,
Mm.
drug abuse,
Wow.
right? Yeah, people who are willing to share that kind of
Sure.
information,
Right.
right? So it's about stepping back into your power.
Mm.
So we're going to get in there. It feels awkward to kind of even get off that subject, but that's very heavy. Let's back up for a moment, even before you started. Who are these people telling you that you should have a podcast, and why? Why do you think they were? I mean, I tend to actually hear that often from people where it's kind of, people constantly planting the bug in the air, and you're like, all right, maybe I should listen to them. But why do you think they were telling you that?
So the feedback I've gotten from the people I have interviewed, especially those who have had their own program for a while,
Yeah.
say that I listen well,
Okay.
that I keep them on point, and I take notes, like I'm taking notes right
Sure.
now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I will say, oh, can we get back to, a couple of minutes ago you talked about, empowerment, let's say. So can you explain to us what you mean by that? So that
Yeah.
type of thing. Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit more about how does a podcast dovetail with your business? Do you see that coming hand in hand? Like how does that segue happen?
Oh, well, like a lot of the things that I talk about are the things that my clients have brought to me
Okay.
as issues, right?
Yeah.
The imposter syndrome, right?
Sure.
Of course, there's podcasts on imposter syndromes.
Yeah.
There's podcasts on, taking the next step, facing the fear. I've got one coming up. The biggest fear is yourself, right? So definitely dovetails very well with the conversations
Got
I
it. I
have.
see tremendously. Terry, I'm gonna ask you the same kind of questions in a moment, but one last question until we get back to you, Terry. Gail, I don't want the name of your show to get lost in this. What do you call your show, and how did you come up with the name?
It's the Empowering Process podcast. I came up with it because I have a book called The Empowering Process.
All right.
And so that's kind of what I'm hanging my hat on, everything. So I have a series of ebooks that I will be releasing soon, and they're all the Empowering Process subtitle, the Empowering Process subtitle. It's what I do, so it fits really well.
Okay, great. So it kind of fits into your moniker, and it fits into who you are and literally what you do for your clients. So it's a great way, and it's probably a phrase or a word that you use a lot with your clients. So I always like to hear the backstory of how people name their show. What about you, Terry? Why don't we start there, and then we can kind of talk about how and when you started your show. What is the name of your show, and how did you come up with that name?
Sure. The name is called Time to Spill. And it was going to be geared towards teens. So I really struggled because I'm not a teen. And I wanted to come up with something that would resonate with them. And for some reason, I thought the words spill, when you spill something, I thought that was sort of old fashioned. But in doing my research, I found out that teens do say that they're going to spill the tea, spill something. So that's how I came up with Time to Spill.
Spill the tea.
That's what they say. Spill the tea. That means give me the information. So time to spill. We're giving them information.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Terry, because I was literally on the phone yesterday with someone who's just about to start a podcast with us, and I won't give it away. But she's incorporating the tea in her show name. Okay. And I was like, well, I mean, like, do you mean it like a coffee chat? Like that? Because that's what, I'm a coffee drinker. I'm a tea drinker as well. But I'm like, yeah, I could get that, like coffee chat. And she's like, yes, but also this is apparently kind of the young person's slang. I've got gray hair myself, so I'm not all that young. So I never understood it. And she's down in, I want to say the Georgia area. And I was like, well, sweet tea and all that is kind of popular in the Georgia area, right? Southern states. So I'm like, is that related to that? And she doesn't think so. She doesn't think it's geographical. Where are you, Terry?
I'm in Illinois, near Chicago.
Okay, right. So it may not be geographic, right? From Chicago to Illinois, from Chicago to Atlanta, people are spilling the tea. So that's cool. So when did you start your show, and what was the inspiration around?
I started it in January of this year. And the inspiration was all the past few years where I've had Teen Job Help. One thing that I did on social media is I would feature teens doing their own thing, teens as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And it would just be a short little blurb about them, and I'd have a picture. And I thought it would be really fun to feature them in a video of doing
Sure.
this. And I knew about podcasting, but I never listened to a podcast, and I knew that format was available. But it just never clicked that would be something that I could use until I took a podcast class.
All right.
And so then I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to feature teen entrepreneurs and then sort of expand on that.
That's really cool. How often do you release episodes?
Once a week.
Once a week. So your weekly show, is it audio only or is it also on video?
It is audio only, but I did my first video recording just this past week that I'm going to launch in a few weeks.
Okay, great. So you essentially for that episode, you'll take the audio and turn that into a podcast because it's typically, you started with video.
Correct.
And that's really tremendous. How do you find your guests?
I just sort of think about things that I think teens would want to know, because we feature teen entrepreneurs, and then also I bring in guests to talk about things that teens are interested in. Drugs, trafficking, human trafficking, career path, LGBTQ community, anything that I think a teen nowadays would be interested in, I try and find a guest related to that.
So then you're kind of like fishing into your circle of influence for guests?
Correct.
Yeah.
And also just kind of throwing bones out there to people, hoping that they'll chomp on it and come talk with me.
Do you ever ask your guests to recommend another guest?
I do, yes.
Okay. That's that's an old trick. It's not something we invented, but it's something that we highly recommend to our clients. That it's like, ask your guest to recommend another guest. We call it GRAG internally, GRAG. Guest recommends another guest, because it keeps that flywheel going. What about you, Gail? Well, how do you find your guests? I mean, these are very deep subjects. Are they your clients necessarily or not necessarily? How do you find them and they're getting into real deep subjects?
So a very bizarre way. So I'm very connected with a lot of coaches. I would say I probably am connected with about 300 coaches.
Wow.
Yes.
How did that happen? Like, why? Like, if you go through that kind of training, you meet people, right? And I belong to a network of about 150 of them, and then your network grows. Sure.
And it's really so I turn to what I consider my most motivational connections and offer the opportunity. But I also will go to networking events, and not your typical BNI type networking events, but where there's collaboration. And I will tell you, I get referrals. First of all, everybody wants to be on a podcast.
Everybody wants,
right? And I have a pre-meeting and say, I want to hear your story, and are you willing to tell it?
Yeah, right.
And if you're not willing to share the pain, then I have other podcast friends. You can go to them, right? And most people are like, yeah, I'll talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like these are very, lack of a better word, like vulnerable subjects, right? These are intimate in the truest sense of the word, right? These are very personal subjects. And likewise with you, Terry, it sounds like you broach those subjects as well, maybe from an entrepreneurial context and obviously a teen context, but nonetheless, both of you kind of have that in common. So hopefully you guys can chat offline, because that's you don't hear that a lot, especially where you're interviewing guest after guest, that to go that deep that quickly. You obviously have that vetting meeting, I think helps. What other kind of preparation do you go through, or do you help your guests go through, Terry, that enables your teen guests to kind of share their story and to go into these type of subjects? I'm going to ask you the same thing, Gail.
I used to, probably my first 5 episodes, I would do a phone call with my guests beforehand. But then I found that some of the best information came out of them then.
Okay.
And I wish I could hit a record button when I was talking to them on the phone.
On the vetting call, they were really spilling the tea offline.
So then I just decided, that's it. I'm gonna set up a 30-minute Zoom call, because my episodes are very short. They're between 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
So I set up a Zoom call and I talk with them in the first 10, 15 minutes, and then we just start recording.
Okay. Now you know better, so to speak. You got your group where you're going to do the vet and then live recording, so that you can keep the spirit going.
Exactly. And I'll do some vetting. We'll go back and forth via email or Instagram message or something to communicate with them a little bit beforehand as well.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that actually. What about you, Gail? Again, likewise, right? You're vetting, you're getting to know, and I hate to say that you're warning them, but you are prepping them that this is a show where you're going to break down barriers and talk about
Right.
empowerment.
And so what I tell them, so we pick the story. Are you willing to talk about that story?
Yeah.
That story will resonate with my listeners.
Yeah.
Are you willing to go there? And so here's how I will set you up, because I have plenty of crap in my life that I can talk about. So I start the conversation with my story that's related to what they're going to talk about, so that I can kick them off with a comfort level of, okay, the dirt's already out there.
Right.
So, even the rape one, I started off with my stories first, right? In order to make it a little bit more comfortable. Now that we videoed it, but everyone was anonymous. No one wanted people to know who they were. Yeah.
Which I could appreciate the sensitivity of the matter.
Right.
So I guess from a hosting perspective, and I ask this really from a selfish perspective, but hopefully it's helpful for listeners and viewers. Like, what kind of questions are you asking, even during the vetting call, Gail, that brings them to that area? I mean, we don't go that deep. I mean, not that this isn't a deep show, but by no means are we going in that kind of depth emotionally here. So, all disclosure there. But how do you go there? Where even on a vetting call, where are these people that you've known for a long time, or not necessarily? So
not necessarily. So I'm very strategic.
Okay.
And I know for the next 12 months, for the year, what categories I want to talk about.
Okay.
So, for example, in June, I'm going to talk about shame. Right. And so, we'll talk a little bit, and I'll say, sounds like you have something that you could share around the shame element. Are you willing to go there? Right. And so I will show the spreadsheet that has the categories. They pick what they're comfortable.
Okay, great. Okay, good.
Sharing.
Okay.
Yep.
So it kind of gives them, lack of a better word, a trigger keyword. I hate to use
right.
that.
Right. And they'll say, I can tell my story around such and such that will talk about, like forgiveness. The art of forgiveness is December. That's a beautiful, I have some beautiful recordings for that. Right. And so it's like, oh, I would love to talk about forgiveness, Gail. Right.
So that's a nice kind of clues and insights and tips, right, for people who are organizing their podcast, that if they want it to be theme oriented, map out the theme. How often do you release your episodes?
Once a week.
Once a week, right? So you've got the weekly for, let's say, the 52 weeks, and now you're able to kind of, lack of a better word, slot people in. Hate to keep it so clinical, but slot people in to where they feel that they can share their story that best.
That's exactly what I do.
Perfect.
And on top of that, so I'll give you guys another little hint. If you saw my spreadsheet, on the top it has the 12 months in the categories. On the left there's week 1, week 2, week 3, and in the adjoining it's like, what am I going to blog about?
Sure, right.
That relates. So that whole week and that whole month, the conversation is around that subject.
Perfect. That's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it is cool, right? Terry, you were starting to allude in terms of your community and where you share your podcast. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, where do you post your show online and podcast platforms?
Certainly. So I have a pod page set up for my podcasts, and then I also post them on Instagram and Facebook.
Cool. And I'm going to assume that you're going to start to do YouTube now that you're doing or flirting with video?
That's correct. Yes.
All right, cool. Soon enough. And what about the, did you mention audio podcast platforms? Did I miss that just now? Okay. Yeah, where can people listen to your show?
They can listen to it everywhere. It's everywhere. Apple, Spotify, everywhere. I went through, when I first started, I just researched where you could throw a podcast out there because I try and go worldwide. I talk to teens worldwide. So I want a teen in India, a teen in Japan to be able to listen to it as well. It's all in English, but any podcast platform, it should be there.
And let's talk about the benefits. I know you're relatively new at this, right? But you've got maybe at this point, what, a dozen or so episodes. Have you seen any stories come through from your audience or from your guests after they've been on your show? Have you kind of heard any of those kind of anecdotes, which happens very often? I'm sure, Gail, you have after 2 years, but I know you're relatively new at this, Terry. Have you heard anything like that so far? Any of those kind of beneficial stories because they heard or been on your show, it triggered something?
Oh, sure. Yes. When I feature a teen entrepreneur to talk about what they're doing, I get a lot of feedback from teens, and I also, that's when I really focus on Instagram, since that's the platform that the teens are on.
Yeah.
So I'll get a lot of feedback that way. Right. And then if I do a show, an episode that features an adult that's talking about a topic for a teen, I'll get a lot of feedback from adults as well, or parents of teens that say that they enjoyed that episode.
That's cool. What about you, Gail? Have you heard any anecdotes or stories you could share with us? The impact?
Yes, I have, but I could keep going back to the shame of last year, and when I did addiction, I had two people who were willing to talk about their addictions, and one wanted to be anonymous. And I'm like, that's fine, we can do that. And a few days beforehand, she called me. She goes, I need to tell my story. I won't be anonymous. I need it out there. So it was very therapeutic for her to do that. Yeah. So, and she's been clean. She's 9 years now. And the gentleman, I think he's 17 or 18 years.
Yeah. That's very, very powerful. Talking about empowering, it's extremely powerful to hear that story.
Right.
So that's tremendous. Where can we watch or can we listen to your show?
So again, it's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, but I also have the Empowering Process podcast. If you want to go out to YouTube,
cool.
Go ahead and subscribe.
So in about a minute or two, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to bring you guys up and wrap up. And my wrap up question is always for you if you're able to rave about another podcast host. I'm a podcast junkie, so I'm constantly watching YouTube versions of podcasts and then listening during my chores and the commute to pick up the kids and all that. But we'll get there. Before we go there, I'd love to hear from you, Gail. Are there any anecdotes or stories that you're able to share of? Has this process of having a podcast, has it helped your business in any way? Did clients come out of the woodwork from your audience? Did clients come out of the woodwork from your guests? What other kind of anecdotes or insights? How has it helped your practice?
I don't think I've seen any shift in my practice. I just see that I podcast more than I blog.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Because I was blogging before.
Okay.
So I was telling the stories before.
Yeah.
So it's just a different venue.
Do you find it easier to host a podcast, or what's you say you're doing it more? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I don't prepare for it.
Okay.
It's like, it's raw, it's real, it's honest. I'll swear,
Sure.
and some pretty powerful cuss words.
Feel free to swear if the.
Oh, you mean I'll say what the fuck.
If the muse hits you.
Right. Because it is in the moment and really, really honest. Whereas if I'm blogging, oh no, that doesn't sound right. I need to change that. It could take me a whole week to write a blog, and it'll take me an hour to do a podcast. So
right.
So I'll give everyone another little hint. I'm going to be creating another podcast series. I'm going to call it like Podettes, because I'm going to take my 10 years of blogging and record them.
Cool. So it'll be your pod blog.
Yep, pod blog.
What about you, Terry? I know it's a relatively short amount of time for you, but has there been an impact on your business?
So I don't know what I even call Teen Job Help. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I started it, but I'm looking now to bring it to a nonprofit status by the end of this year. But yes, it's brought in some people, some teens who are interested. They asked me to help them find a job. So yes, it has brought in some action.
Which is kind of cool, right? To see, I mean, even if it's a nonprofit, it's still, it has that business operation aspect. It still has the job to do in terms of revenue build and value creation and all that stuff, right? So it's good for you. That's tremendous. I like hearing that. Let's take a quick commercial break, and then we're gonna come back, wrap up. You'll maybe share a thing or two about another podcast, and then how we can get a hold of you to learn more about your shows.
Okay.
Do you want your own podcast like this one? My team will do all the grunt work for you. Just show up, smile, and enjoy talking to your potential clients and referral relationships. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Are you a busy lawyer, coach, consultant like me? You should have a podcast done for you to get you more clients, impress your colleagues, and it becomes your perpetual referrals flywheel. We find you the right guests. We schedule your guests, handle all the podcast tech, get you into Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and more. Done for you. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Now back to the show.
And back to our guests, Gail and Terry. Are either one of you coming to our Show Host Network? I know you guys are chatting a little bit, so I know you guys will continue chatting even after the show. So sorry to interrupt your conversation. Do you guys know about our Show Host Networking event happening on April 28th? I'm going to say no. Okay, cool. So once a month, and definitely you guys should come. If you can't come April 28th, we do it the last Thursday of every month. So I believe the next one's May 26th, and you can get that corrected, hopefully. So it's the last Thursday of the month. So every month we bring together dozens and dozens. Last one was like over 100 people. I'm sure already pretty filled for April, of podcast hosts. Folks, much like yourself, especially, do you like being a guest on other people's podcasts?
Oh, yes.
Okay, yes. Cool. So do I. And so if you go to videosocials.net, I think Sarah from backstage put it into the private chat, videosocials.net/show hosts. So obviously for both of you, for anyone else out there who hosts a podcast, if by chance you're out there and you've been thinking about hosting a podcast, maybe you like Gail, people have constantly putting the bug in your ear that, hey, you should host a podcast. You're going to meet folks like Gail. You're going to meet folks like Terry, if not literally them. April 28th, it's 1 p.m. Eastern. It's just shy of 2 hours. It's on Zoom. We do breakout rooms where it's about a dozen people. So it becomes these roundtable discussions where you're able to introduce yourself to other hosts who are always looking for guests and looking to interview other subject matter experts. And of course, they are looking as well to be a guest on other people's shows. Not necessarily to swap interviews, because that's not always appropriate or even an opportunity, because let's say my show is specifically around being a podcast host. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Necessarily, I could have another podcast host, I guess. But Gail, Terry, likewise for you, you would have to kind of see that they may not be a great fit for your show, but you may be a good fit for somebody else's show, and they may know someone else who's a good fit for your show.
Right.
So
I get so many referrals. Unbelievable. When someone gets what I do, I get amazing referrals for my podcast.
So tell us about that. How can we not only listen to your podcast, but is there any kind of a freebie or call to action or anything that you talk about on your podcast that people can go to and learn more about you, your website?
I usually don't talk about me. I talk about my guest, right? That's what happens with the podcast host.
Here's an opportunity for you to talk about yourself.
Okay. But
how do people get to know you? How do people learn?
Yeah, so you could go to gailcraft.com, GAILKRAFT, like the cheese.com, and that is my website. Or you can find me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and then connect with me there for sure.
Cool. And are you a podcast junkie like I am? Do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I listen to podcasts if I'm exercising or walking. Right?
Yeah.
It's a great thing to do while it's multitasking. Not when I'm driving, because I want to pay attention.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah. Good to be safe. Is there another podcast that you're a raving fan of, a host that you know well that you'd love to share?
Yes, actually, there's a gentleman who's been podcasting around the same time as me, and I think his podcast is at the 1% now on Apple.
Awesome.
And it's Jesse, his wife, and Travis Crutcher.
And what's the name of his show?
I don't know. I just have it on linked right away. But they will talk about anything. Okay. And it's amazing with the two of them.
So it's
and
he and his wife.
Yep.
Interviewing a guest.
Sometimes.
Or the two of them.
Yep.
And they can be talking about, like, what are some of the things that they talk about?
They talked about bicentennials. They talked, if something comes up in the news, they'll be like, "What's this shit all about, man?" Right? Yeah. Right? And they'll get into whatever is happening. Cool. He's a retired military guy, so it's very in your face.
In your face. Cool.
Which is why I like it.
How did you learn about the show, or are you like longtime friends? Like, how did you?
So Travis is also a coach.
Okay.
right? And like I said, I know a lot of coaches,
Sure.
right? And when he started his podcast, it was just him, and it was doing okay.
Sure.
And then Jesse got on.
All right. That was a secret sauce.
Right.
Really
So we
good.
know who the star of the show is.
That's good. That's good. I'm sure he'll readily admit to that too. I'm
He
sure.
will. Yep.
That's cool.
Yep.
That's
He married
good.
up.
That's
He
awesome.
knows he married up. Yep.
Very cool. Terry, what about you? How do we learn more about you? Is there any other resources that you could share? And is there a podcast that you'd like to hear about?
Sure. So I have a website and it's teenjobhelp.com. And then I'm on all social media platforms as Teen Job Help. So very simple.
Very
And
easy.
then the podcast is called Time to Spill.
And are you a podcast junkie? I don't want to speak for Gail, but I call myself a podcast junkie. Yeah, that's all I basically watch or listen to. What about you? Do you listen? You said that you weren't one, right? You didn't listen to a lot of podcasts before you had your own. What about since then? Have you started listening?
I am almost a podcast junkie. I do listen a lot now. I'm in several different podcasting groups, so I try and listen to other members to help support them. And then I find one that I particularly like, so I'll listen to that all the time. So yeah, I'm getting there.
Is there a host you could rave about that you're particularly close with and a colleague?
Yes, and he is a teen. He's 15 years old.
Excellent.
His name is Benjamin Wong, and he's actually on 2 podcasts. He created and he hosts a podcast called Kid CEO.
Cool.
And then he's also a host of another podcast called Young Trep.
He's
phenomenal. He started the Kid CEO podcast when he was 12.
Okay.
Which when I was 12, I think I was still playing in the mud somewhere. He's amazing. He's an amazing young man.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting to know him. Hopefully he'll be a guest and share his insights. It'll be really fun to have him on. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Terry. This has been tremendous.
Vikram, this was fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
It was, and very, very insightful, which that's kind of, for me, I want to check off the box. I want it to be fun and interesting, of course, but also insightful, especially for those of us who are already having a podcast or thinking of having a podcast. And both of you kind of shared a lot of kind of the insights that have made both of you successful in being a host. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And before we leave, I forgot to mention at the top where everyone can watch and listen to our show. So it streams just about every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube. You can, of course, listen to my show, just like Gail and Terry's show, on all the major podcast platforms, from Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, from Spotify, Stitcher, which I personally use on my Android, iHeartRadio, etc. So I'm looking forward to everyone to go to Gail and Terry's sites and subscribe to their shows. And when you get a moment, to subscribe to our show of Why We Podcast, of how attorneys and accountants, coaches and consultants are helping others through their podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.